I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Please sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com for updates on podcast guests and lots of live events. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. I hope that you have had a chance to check out We Found Time, wefoundtime.com, my new online magazine. We have such amazing essays out this week, and I really hope you'll take the time to go read them or send them to friends or see what you think. And I'd love your feedback if you have any thoughts. All the essays on We Found Time are written by authors who have been on this podcast already. So it's original content, and I think it's really awesome. So I really hope you'll check it out. This week's sponsor is Nini's Treats, which is my in-laws' crumb cake business, and it is so good. And they had gone on hiatus for a little while, and they're back in business now, stronger than ever. And it's the best crumb cake in all different flavors, and you can order it on goldbelly.com. And their brand is called Nini's Treats. Nini is my husband Kyle's grandmother, Nene''S, Nini's Treats. And you just search it on Goldbelly, and they have this amazing black and white crumb cake and a regular crumb cake. And anyway, it's really delicious. And for everybody who is at home and going stir crazy, it will ship really quickly and fresh, and you can freeze it if you don't want to eat it right away. So anyway, ninistreats.com or go buy it on goldbelly.com. I'm here today with Janelle Brown, who is the New York Times bestselling author of Watch Me Disappear, All We Ever Wanted Was Everything, and This Is Where We Live. Her latest book, Pretty Things, comes out April 21st, 2020. Her journalism has appeared in the New York Times, Vogue, Elle, Wired, Self, Real Simple, and many other publications. She began her career as a staff writer at Wired during the internet boom. In the 1990s, she was the editor and co-founder of Maxi, an irreverent pop culture webzine, can't remember how to say that. Originally from San Francisco, Janelle graduated from UC Berkeley. She currently lives in Los Angeles with her husband and 2 children. Welcome, Janelle. Thanks for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
I am so happy to be here.
Can you please tell listeners what Pretty Things is about?
Pretty Things is about 2 young women. One is a con artist, and the other one is an Instagram influencer who happens to also be an heiress. It's about a con artist who basically takes on this heiress and moves into her guest house with grand schemes in mind, and then everything goes very sideways from there.
Your guide to how to rob someone based on their Instagram profile was like the most terrifying thing I think I've ever read. I was literally like, oh my gosh, like people are out there just stalking people's accounts, and look at how easy it would be just to take anything.
Well, you know, what kind of inspired me to write this book, I mean, there were a lot of things that inspired me actually, but one of the things that I was fascinated by was, remember when Kim Kardashian was robbed by that, you know, in France by that,
yes,
that group of thieves? They were tracking her online. That's how they found it. And I was fascinated by that basically like, she led them straight to her by, you know, flashing her jewelry on Instagram and then leaving enough clues that they could figure out where she was staying. And then, you know, next thing you know, they're breaking into her house and robbing her of millions of dollars of jewelry. So that was kind of one of the stories that motivated me to write this book. But then also, yeah, you know, my mother, when I got on social media, was like, you really shouldn't put anything on there. People could stalk you. And I always laughed at her, but not really, because there was certainly a truth to that. I was actually stalked once when I was in college. And so, you know, I'm kind of conscious of what people are doing when you're not aware, like how people might be watching you when you aren't realize you're being watched. And certainly that's what Instagram is all about. And especially when you have these people who are just out there kind of flaunting their lives. I mean, that's what so much of Instagram is, and what influencing is, you know, showing off your best life. And if your best life means showing off all the things you have, how easy would it be for someone to just go, oh, there's my mark, you know?
Totally. My last Instagram post was about mopping the floor, so I don't feel like I'm that much at risk right at this exact moment. But if somebody wants to steal my mop, that's fine. Oh my gosh.
I mean, we're at home all the time right now, so no one's going to be breaking in when you're not here.
That's true. I know. There was like some ridiculous report in the newspaper, like crime is way down. And I'm like, yeah. Like, who's there to even watch the crimes happen, even if they were happening? So anyway, yeah. Wait,
Yeah.
can we back up to when you were stalked in college? Tell me more about that. That must have been terrifying.
It was a little strange. It was my sophomore year of college, and I just moved into a co-op building. I went to UC Berkeley, and they have these kind of famous residences, which are co-ops, which are like communal housing. And one night I woke up like in the middle of the night, and this guy had like climbed into bed with me.
What?
I was like, yeah. I mean, he was fully dressed, and he was like on top of the covers. So it wasn't like, but yeah. And I screamed, and the guy ran out of the room, and it turned out it was my next door neighbor in the building, and he was mentally, he was schizophrenic and was having an episode. And I guess he'd somehow, I'd never actually met him because I'd only been living there for a month, and he had barely left his room, but he had apparently become kind of obsessed with me. And they hauled him away to a mental hospital the next day. And then he proceeded for the next year or so to like, sometimes call me 20, 30 times a day. It was very strange. I mean, it was nothing. I never saw him again. There was just that one time. But for the next year, I changed my phone number. He found my new phone number. He would call me. He wouldn't actually talk to me. He would just leave these strange messages, but it was him. So that was my stalker story. But that was like a lot of years ago.
Wow. So was that like capturing that fear part of what made you want to write thrillers or not unrelated, or what do you think?
Unrelated. It's funny. I never set out to write thrillers, and I actually wouldn't even describe myself as a thriller writer per se. I know that's kind of the catchphrase that marketing uses, but I kind of think of myself more of a literary suspense. The pacing is not your typical thriller, But I kind of came to writing these kinds of books very sideways. My first two books that I wrote were not at all suspense novels, and they're page turners, but they were like domestic dramas. They're more Jonathan Franzen-y,
Mm-hmm.
And then I started writing my third novel, Watch Me Disappear, and I was kind of imagining that as being another book in the same vein about a father and a daughter who are kind of coping after the disappearance of the mother/wife, and kind of I was planning it to be about grief and coming together, the father and the daughter. And then as I wrote it, this kind of story emerged that turned out to be a mystery. Like, where was the mom? Had she gone on this hike? Had she died? Or was she still alive? And then by the time I finished the book and turned it in, my editor called me and she's like, "You wrote a suspense novel." And I'm like, "I did?" That really wasn't what I was planning to do. And so when, that book did really well, it became a New York Times bestseller. And so, of course, they called me. They're like, "Would you write another one? Can you write another suspense novel?" And I was like, "Okay, sure." And because I love suspense novels. I love like Tana French and Megan Abbott and Gillian Flynn and all these kind of like, there's so many, Laura Lippman, there's so many kind of wonderful, crime and suspense and mystery writers now, especially women that are writing books that are like your unconventional, not what we used to think of suspense novels as, right? They're a little more, breaking the mold, I guess is what I want to say. And so I kind of took it as a challenge when I was writing this one to really approach it as, okay, now I am writing suspense intentionally. How do I write something that doesn't feel like something that's been written 100 times before, 1,000 times before? And so I wanted to read something I hadn't written. I wanted to write something I hadn't read before. And so I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about what I like in suspense novels, what makes me excited, what makes me feel like I'm intrigued, but I'm involved in the characters, and I want to know what's happening, but I also really want to spend time on each page as opposed to like just find out who did it,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I think I got off the track of your question, which was, did the stalker make you want to write a book?
But you actually answered like 15 other questions, so it ended up working out just fine. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to miscategorize. I feel like I lump so many types of books into the overarching term thriller, and I shouldn't. And I know there are differences between the genres, but I think it's sometimes confusing even for me, and I like deal with books all the time. So I'm sorry
you don't
for
need
not
to apologize. No, it's okay. My marketing people also call it a thriller. So because I think it's like, when you look at the bookstore categories, and this is what kind of crazy making is like, why do we have genre categories anyway? Because half of the time you like look at a book and it gets categorized under this very narrow category, like crime novel, mystery novel, thriller, romance, comedy. And so many of the great books, the ones that I love and the books that I like to write, are ones that kind of break through multiple categories, right? Ones that are like not easily quantifiable as one thing or another. And so as much as I understand that, like, that shorthand is important for marketing and for bookstores and for people who are like, I kind of like this genre, I want more books in this genre. And also as the author, I always want to cringe a little bit, like, oh, that's so much more complexity than that,
I mean, I feel like it's the same thing for the movies, right? There's some movies
right.
and you're like, wasn't there somebody who won an Academy Award and they were like, well, apparently I was in a comedy.
Yeah,
And really
exactly.
It was like a drama or something. So yeah, I feel like everybody just wants to dump everything into different categories and be done with it. But my pet peeve is with my pet peeve in particular is with the YA category, because it's not for young adults. It's just about young adults. Like, it's totally misleading. Right. Some of those books are so good. So I don't know.
Yeah. And then people come to books expecting something and they get disappointed when it's not that. Like, when someone picks up a book and expects it to be like, James Patterson thriller, and it's like a contemplative story about a family, they get mad, right? Because it's not what they thought they were going to be reading. And sometimes they get excited. Sometimes they, they're happy to read something different. But people come to books with expectations based on the categories that they're put in, and that's always kind of hard to break out of, right?
Totally. So, even the covers, I feel like now it's become very formulaic with like, okay, here's my thriller type cover. It has to have these 4 characteristics so people know it's a thriller. As if we're all like so dumb. We can't turn the thing over and read the back flap. Like, we can, like, I feel like if you're reading a book and you're I should stop talking. This is probably inappropriate, but I mean.
No, it's okay.
I'm like now venting all of my issues here. But I feel like if for readers who are out there and shopping and wanting to buy books, they're going to turn it over, and aren't they? I mean, I don't know. I just.
Yeah. Okay. I hear you. I totally do. And I feel really happy. I love my cover, and I've been really lucky with my cover on this one and my last one as well, because they're, they kind of have a thrillery look, but they don't totally look like a thriller book. So they have a lot going on. Anyway, I love my cover.
Yeah. No, I love your color too, especially the red. And no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Actually, the other day I was like laying on my couch and I had on like the perfect matching outfit for your book. And that's why I like posted about it. I had like this like pale green sweater and black pants on my like tan couch. And I was like, ooh, I match with this book cover. I'm going to have to start it. Oh, so funny. Anyway, well, more about the book. When Vanessa talks about her friends, Vanessa, one of the characters, says, when my father died, they sent texts, but didn't pick up the phone. Maybe that was the moment that I realized that my friendships were like the thin crust on a frozen lake, a barrier blocking the way to anything deeper. And I felt like that was such a good commentary on how some friends like do respond and how friendships have evolved, I feel like, for so many busy people. Tell me a little more about that passage.
Yeah, I've gone through different transitions in my life, and every time you go through a transition, you watch friendships fall away, right? Like you move and you watch friendships fall away. You have children and suddenly like you realize some of your friends that you thought we were so close to, like you just don't speak to anymore. Or, people that you go through a hard time and some people can't handle it and they just kind of vanish. And especially, social media is wonderful in a lot of ways. And this book is harsh. My book harshes on social media a lot, but I also think that I've created some amazing connections through social media and met some incredible people. But there is also this certain shallowness to a lot of the connection there, where there is a difference between having a friend who you really tell everything to on a daily basis. You see each other, you spend time together, you touch each other's hands, when you're talking, and someone who you never actually meet in person. And I think that kids today young people today are kind of growing up in this world where more and more the interaction that you have with your friends is done virtually. And I do worry that some of that is not as deep as connection that is spent, in person together, right? So that was kind of imagining this, Vanessa as kind of having these friendships that are all based on surfaces, and the minute her life starts to go sideways, everyone kind of backs away, and it's easy to do because you just send a couple texts and, ghost somebody in a way that is hard to do if you're actually seeing them, right?
So true. Another part of the book, in addition to just like the bigger plot of it, was the backstory of everybody. And I felt like all your characters had such bad things happen to them, or such sad things, and like one after another. I'm like, oh no, this happened too. I can't believe it. I was wondering how you're tapping in, because I felt like you did such a good job of tapping into that feeling of grief and loss and tragedy, really, that what you have to go through when you experience something like that. How are you so good at writing about that? Did you have, not to pry, but did you have like some trauma, or did something happen, or are you just like super empathetic?
I don't have any trauma. I mean, my family has had their issues over the years. We've all had ups and downs, but I've never had anything relating to the trauma that I put my own characters through. I like to put my characters through the ringer. And I guess I think as a writer, in order to be a good writer, you need to be a little bit of a psychologist, right? And to kind of be interested in the human psyche and what makes people do the things that they do, and how people carry the trauma inside themselves that they experience. And so I'm fascinated by character, by people, and how they kind of persevere through the stuff that they've experienced. And so I guess that means I'm an empath, I guess. I'm empathic, or just nosy and curious about what makes people tick. But no, I've never had a schizophrenic brother. I've never had a mother who's a con artist. I've never, had a mother who committed suicide. All these things that I have my poor characters go through in this story. No, not me.
I think you're right, though. I think writers you have to be interested in how the mind works when you're delving deep into somebody else. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, exactly.
So I read that you covered the internet economy during the .com boom back in the day, which I was a part of, working at a company called Idea Lab during that time, which was like the hub
I remember
of
Idea Lab.
All these startups and everything.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. What lessons do you think you could sort of take away from that time as it applies to this like burgeoning Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and I don't even know, House Party, whatever everybody's doing? Like, do you think there's like any warning signs or just anything you took away from that period of time to this period of time?
I mean, it's funny because, I was working at Wired and Salon.com in San Francisco during like 95 to 2002. And what we imagined the world was going to be like, we had this kind of utopian view back then, right? Which was, revolution, but for good, and the world is going to come together, and, speech needs to be free, and and yes, some of those things have come to pass, and there's been some great things that have come out of the internet that we imagined. Access certainly has been amazing. Like you can get digital books, digital music, like streaming video, but so much we didn't imagine. The kind of obsessiveness that happens, like the way that social media has kind of this addictive presence in our lives. And I don't know that I could say that I learned lessons then that apply now, because I feel like we're in such a different place now than we were 20 years ago. But I guess maybe the lesson that I could apply is that everything changes so quickly, and the way you think the world is going to be now is going to be completely different in a decade or 2 decades. And so be careful, I guess, what you wish for.
Yeah, I feel like maybe one of the things I learned from watching that whole boom and bust was that like the people in charge don't necessarily know what's going on.
Yes.
I had so much faith in the people running things that they just understood, and it turns out that they really didn't necessarily. So I don't know. I don't know how to apply that, but
That is a good lesson. That's a good lesson.
So what's your writing process like? Where and when do you like to write?
Well, usually I go to my office every day. I started a kind of collective writing space in Los Angeles near my house. A couple of writers and I started it like 8 years ago, and we have about, 25 writers, I think, that share the office, kind of a bunch of rooms in this mid-century modern building that's over here in Silver Lake. And I usually go there and write every day, but sometimes I work at cafes a little bit. But usually what happens is I get my kids off to school and then run to my office and try and write until I have to go back and pick them up from school. Right now I'm stuck at home, obviously, because of the coronavirus. But so my writing process now is I'm trying to get up at 5 a.m. to work before the kids have to be homeschooled. But hopefully this won't last forever.
That's impressive.
Hopefully.
Do you have a deadline? Do you have to do it?
I'm working on a couple things right now. So yeah, okay. I need to be working. So it also keeps me sane. If I wasn't working at all, I feel like I need to be doing something, or I'm just going to slide into depression,
I've said that same line maybe like 100 times in the last 2 weeks. I'm like, I have to be doing something. I have to. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
This is the question that always is so hard for me, because I feel like everybody's writing process is so different. And I hate making blanket statements about how you should write or the way that you should write. I know that for myself, the process of becoming a writer was about reading, and like not just reading, but like reading and rereading, like picking up a book and reading it 3 or 4 times and thinking about how that book was assembled. It's like beyond the enjoyment of it. Like how do you describe it? Like what makes a clock tick, right? When you take the front off and you kind of look at how the cogs work in the back. The more you read a book, the more you start to see how things fit together. I haven't done this in a while, but I used to diagram books and kind of do like maps of books that I had read that I thought were interesting to me. And so I'd kind of mark out what happens on what page and why, and kind of look at how it was constructed that way. So those are kind of useful tools. And then, the only other piece of advice is the one that everyone gives, which I'm sure is, you have to sit down, you have to just write. Don't be afraid to throw it away. Write and rewrite. But everyone says that. So it's hardly an original piece of writing advice.
It's okay. I mean, sometimes people need to hear something, maybe the 87th time, then it really sinks in,
Right. Exactly.
I mean, you can hear it, but when you hear how it works for someone else, I think it's much more powerful than just reading a statement. I mean, you can know it, but hearing you say that this is what helps you, I think that helps. So who knows?
Yeah, that's true.
And just one last question, because I didn't understand. So how did you move from going from the .com era and being a journalist to writing fiction? Did you always want to write books, or how did that happen?
Yeah, I always wanted to be a novelist. Like back when I was in first grade, literally first grade, I used to make little books and write little stories about my pet basset hound, Pogo, and I would bind them into books, like using wallpaper as like the covers, and have pages in them. And I remember my first grade teacher told me that I should be an author when I grew up, and I took her advice very seriously and kind of stuck with that idea my whole childhood, that was what I was going to do when I grew up. And I ended up working as a journalist after college just because I wanted to actually have a job and an income. and being a novelist isn't necessarily something you can start off and make money at. And so I kind of I got sidelined by the .com boom. I ended up in journalism, and for almost a decade, that's kind of what filled the world and filled my world. So it was around like 2002, 2003 that I left my job and decided that I needed to like really give writing a go, and writing fiction a go. And so I went freelance and was freelancing for like the New York Times and a bunch of other magazines, and then working on my first novel on the side. And it took me about 4 years to finish my first novel and sell it. And then I've basically been a full-time novelist ever since. So that's like 12 years now. I don't really do much journalism anymore, certainly not the way I used to. I write the occasional essay, but not reporting, not investigative journalism, certainly. So, yeah.
Well, as my husband would say, you're living the dream. It's like what every writer wants is to be able to say, like, I can just sit here and write novels for 12 years. It's amazing. So anyway.
Yeah. I count myself as very lucky for sure. I feel like I've been very lucky. My books have done very well, and I've been well received, and I am appreciative every day of that. Being a full-time novelist has its own challenges too, but different ones, different emotional challenges. But I feel very happy. I feel very privileged. So
awesome
to be able to do what I do.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, it was so nice to chat with you, and I'm sorry for our technological issues at the beginning, but this was great.
Okay.
And thank you for coming on this podcast. And I'm
You're
sorry
welcome.
also that we can't do it in person in LA. I was looking forward to that, but some other time maybe.
Me too. I know. Once this all lifts, I'm going to be everywhere. I'm like, you want to come over?
Yeah.
Come over. Let me come over right now.
Totally. I'm like,
get me out of my house.
I know. Oh my gosh. I know the traffic's going to be crazy. Anyway.
Oh my God.
All right. Well, thanks again. And
you're welcome.
Take care.
And are we doing an Instagram live next week?
Yes, I think we have it on Wednesday. Is that right?
Yes. Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much. I love your podcast, and I love what you're doing for books, by the way. So it's a delight to finally connect with you. So.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for saying that.
You're
That's
welcome.
nice. Okay. All right. Well, have a great weekend.
We'll talk more next week.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books with Zibby Owens. Please make sure to sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com to get more updates about episodes like these and also lots of live events. Thanks so much for listening today. Again, please go check out wefoundtime.com, wefoundtime.com for this week's new 5 essays from authors who have been on the podcast. And also go to goldbelly.com and order some Nini's Treats crumb cakes. They are so good and you will not regret it, although your clothes might be a little tight next week. I hope you all have a great week. Bye-bye. Thanks. You can follow me on Instagram at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music. Thanks for listening. You could always email me at zibby@zibbyowens.com.